Hello once again, and thanks for joining. Chris Gladwin here, CEO of Ocient. Welcome to Big Bytes with Ocient. Can we pause for just a second? How is it December already? Like it literally was summer 3 or 4 days ago here in Chicago, and now it's winter all of a sudden. The year definitely flew by. Thanks for sticking with us and supporting this podcast where we geek out about all things data, how massive data sets are revolutionizing industries, and let's be honest, how cool this stuff really is. So today we've got a fantastic episode for you with 2024 wrapping up and 2025 knocking on the door. I thought it'd be the perfect time to reflect on what's ahead in the tech world. And to do that, I've got the one and only Eric Kavanagh joining me. Now, if you don't know Eric, let me say you're in for a treat. He's a self-proclaimed serial media innovator, the host of DM Radio, and someone who's always looking at what's next. Eric, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for inviting me. Big Bites from Chicago. I love it.
That's right. You grew up here,
Yeah,
right?
that's right. Suburbs, not quite Chicago, but close.
Cool. That counts. That definitely counts. So let's dive right in. What's got you buzzing about the tech landscape as we look at 2025?
Well, I'll tell you what excites me the most is really the confluence of technologies. So we've had AI for decades. People know that. We've had analytics for a very long time. There are a whole bunch of things coming together. And one I'll talk about hopefully at some point in this show is process mining. So when you look at
Hmm.
process mining in conjunction with artificial intelligence, machine learning, for example, analytics, TCO, ROI, all these things come into play, and we'll finally know what's working and what's not. We'll be able to measure that. And I mean, is there anything better for a business executive than to be able to measure and manage who's doing what and how well it's working, beyond just the numbers of products sold or things of this nature, but how long it takes to do things? That's all coming into play right now. And I think, frankly, we are at the beginning of a phase of hyper accelerated innovation.
Wow. Wow. And I feel like human beings tend to have this, I don't know, emotional response to technology change to feel like, whoa, I made it. I had to learn that thing. I had to install that thing. I had to use that thing. Phew, I'm done. But in reality, the pace at which they have to do that just keeps accelerating because next year is going to have even more. So when you look at next year, is there anything that you think will catch people off guard? Where the stuff that makes people say, "Hey, wait, whoa, what just happened?"
I think there are lots of things to keep in mind, and I'll throw out my big caveat if that makes sense here. And I ask people this question: what percentage of your business can be wrong on a regular basis? Can your business be wrong
Hmm.
10% of the time, 20% of the time?
Hmm.
What, sales, operations, accounting? No, accounting has to be right all the time or
Yeah,
darn near all the
yeah,
time.
yeah,
If there are exceptions, they're
yeah, yeah,
small. And the thing to remember with these foundational models is they are probabilistic in nature, which means they're not going to be deterministic. They're not going to get to 100%. I even watched a webinar with Andrew Ng a couple weeks ago, very famous AI pioneer, getting all excited about getting models from 80% to 85% or 90% accuracy. Well, what part of your business can be wrong 10% of the time? Not much. So I think
yeah.
people do need to keep this in mind and use these technologies in appropriate ways, understanding that these foundational models are probabilistic. So as long as you have them in employee facing roles, or if you have really good guardrails for anything that is exposed to the outside world, you should be okay. But I think people will be surprised at what these models can learn and what they can pay attention to. And that's going to be an interesting and tumultuous period of time, I think, as people realize how much of their work is going to be readily accessible and understandable, both in good ways and bad ways. And it's going to keep us all honest, I think. So I think there
Yeah.
will be surprises when people realize how much some of these models can learn. Again, with the caveat that they are not always going to be right. In fact, they'll never always be right.
Yeah, it also seems like AI is exacerbating an already very big issue in the industry, which is energy. AI has an accelerating demand for energy, but that's on top of accelerating demands for energy from all kinds of data analytics and all kinds of just information technology in general. How severe do you think energy scarcity is going to be in the coming year or the coming years as an issue? And when it comes to quantum computing, AI, analytics, they're voracious consumers of an accelerating amount of energy. Are we facing a tech energy crunch?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think something as important as energy is going to sort itself out. I think there are also some really amazing innovations that are happening. And, one thing I love about
Hmm.
human ingenuity is that it finds new ways to do things. I know of some
Yeah.
people doing really cool work in the quantum space using bacteria as the conduit, as opposed to graphene, for example, or some other mechanisms. There's a fund out of
Hmm.
Abu Dhabi that's putting some money into some of these efforts. So there are some very interesting things happening, and frankly, Ocient is doing some good work in this space
Hmm.
in improving the efficiency of the compute. And there are other companies using this NVMe, which you know a whole lot about. I know it's one of the guys who worked on the protocol itself, and they're doing absolutely amazing things in making the process of compute much more efficient, especially with GPUs. So I think that it
Hmm.
is something to be considered. It's going to be a driver. I mean, people who innovate are familiar with constraint-based design. So it is a
Right.
constraint and we'll need to take it into consideration. But you think about the observability that we can get these days into what the machines are doing, how quickly they're doing these things, the analysis you can now do on all that is tremendously powerful. And when you work in the process mining, I would argue you'll now be able to really understand how these algorithms and how this technology is improving your business. What are the outcomes? How has it changed? So we'll be able to get much more granular about our use of energy. And I'm a big fan of energy use. I'm a big fan of plants. Plants love CO2, so I'm not too worried about all that.
Hmm.
But sustainability is important and efficiency, just good old fashioned efficiency, being resourceful with what you have to work with has always been a good mantra to live by. And I think we'll be okay. But it is going to raise eyebrows. People are going to have to pay attention to it. And in doing so, I think we'll come up with some even more cool innovations.
I moved to Chicago in 1991 to work for Zenith Data Systems, who at the time was the largest portable PC maker in the world. And that was the time in the industry for the first time where the computing end user computing devices, the laptop, was going mainstream. So for the first time, the computer vendors had to think about energy efficiency because all we had was a battery. And if you look at what's been done in the decades since, we squeeze a lot of computing out of our phone, out of our laptop, out of our tablet, because that's what engineers have been focused on doing to get battery life. We haven't seen that on the enterprise side of things. They've just been focused, those engineers, those vendors, on getting the maximum performance or amount of storage or speed of networking. And energy wasn't really a part of what they're optimizing. But that seems to be changing. And it seems like next year is the first year where enterprise computing is going to optimize its energy efficiency. We started doing that at Ocient a few years ago and quickly reduced energy by 90% for large
Wow.
scale computing. And we've got another 90% on our roadmap that we're going to be rolling out another 90% reduction. And I think the rest of the industry is going through that same change, especially next year. And there's a lot of talent. And once you tell engineers like you need to focus on energy efficiency,
Right.
you're going to see a lot of progress very, very quickly. And a lot of that comes with the hardware, software co-design working together. Um, that's been pivotal for years. How hardware and software needs to work together. But do you see anything coming up next year in terms of hardware software co-design that you think is going to have a big impact on the industry?
Short answer is yes. And I'm old enough to remember converged infrastructure and things of this nature. And
Hmm.
I had a guest on our show years ago. He made a really interesting point. He said when you start seeing innovations in the hardware space, that really sort of kicks off a whole range of other innovations. But it typically starts at the hardware and then it kind of moves up the stack. So to the operating system, to
Yep.
the app, to the network, and it sort of cascades outward, if you will. But now, in part because of the drive for electric vehicles, in part because we have
Hmm.
all this attention focused on battery life in the electric vehicles, even if they're not taking off the way people wanted them to, nonetheless, there's a tremendous amount of engineering going into all that. And when you then look at the open source community and how intense that is and the drive to win the AI war, I think you are starting to see this. And you look at the innovation in the chips, look at what NVIDIA has done, just blowing the
Hmm.
doors off of what was thought to be possible 5 years ago. Well, that's all the way down at the chip design. And they've now compressed
For
that
sure.
life cycle too. It used to be like 10 years. Now it's like 2 years. It might even be less than that from ideation to production. And that's amazing. So, is it hitting the consumer laptop market? I mean, you're starting to see lots of these, like Lenovo and some of these other guys, talk about AI baked into the machine. Microsoft is talking about this. Some other people are going there as well. Jury's out in my mind as to exactly how that's going to pan out. I think there are other shoes left to drop in the AI space, like how much it really costs to train these models.
Hmm.
And if
Yep.
they go sideways, what's the impact of that? So we don't, there are a lot of unknown unknowns still in this whole world, but I do think that we're getting closer and closer to really fusing the hardware and software design process, and that's very good news. And in fact, one of the
Yeah.
companies I alluded to, this guy, very smart guy, he went out and hired two of the top Linux kernel developers to help him map out how they're moving data at hyper speed, kind of like you guys are. Same thing of leveraging NVMe in that protocol. And these are
Right.
smart people. Like if you're working on the kernel for Linux, it takes a pretty smart
Yeah. Yeah.
person to do. So I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
we're getting there.
Yeah, excellent. Well, let's shift gears to cloud computing because definitely been a big trend in the industry. And people have, most enterprises have kind of moved their new deployments to cloud in the past years. But are we seeing a shift? One of the things we hear a lot about is customers are really unhappy, particularly for larger systems, with the cost of operating those in clouds. Do you think we're gonna see a shift from kind of the current use of clouds in the future? Are hybrids going to become a popular way? Hybrid cloud systems that are hybrids. Is this the year of the hybrid? Are you going to do you think there's going to be a shift in any kind of cloud computing?
Well, I'll put it to you this way. I've said for a long time now that the rumors of on-prem's demise have been greatly exaggerated. I think that
Right.
on-prem is going to be here for a while. And you have to remember, like, to get into the cloud, one of the things you had to do is to kind of dumb down the architecture of some of these applications. That's why you would see an ERP, for example, up in the cloud, a much simpler architecture. And SAP had a lot of trouble trying to force people back into a simpler model from the incredibly
Hmm.
complex models you would have in on-prem environments. And so there's a bit of a give and take on that front, and you kind of have to know where and when to do something in the cloud, and if you could do it cloud native, for example, and that's a bit of a moving target as well. But I also see again some of these advances in data movement and data access changing the game. And the company I was referring to, they create what's called a global namespace, and it's a parallel file
Hmm.
system that allows you to move anything anywhere at hyper speed. So that kind of innovation changes the whole architecture and the de facto information architecture. So I think that yes, that there is going to be this hybrid future, and it's probably going to be hybrid for a long time. There are advantages to going cloud only, but they're not that great. I mean, they're for
Yeah.
IP, for example, or for PII, there are certain things that you want to keep very close to your vest, and that's going to
Yeah.
be on prem. And so I think that the architectures of the future will be much more elegant than those of the past, and that will be good for on prem and good for hybrid.
And it seems like the measuring stick of cost efficiency, price performance, is becoming more important, and that's causing people to consider if there's a better way. I
Hmm.
also wonder if that same thing's going to happen with a lot of these AI investments. Really, over the past couple of years, enterprises have gone from not very much going on to a whole bunch going on in AI, but it's kind of been in the exploring phase. And now that we're getting into the you got to roll this out phase, does that mean that you're going to see a lot more pressure on organizations to show a return on investment from these AI investments? And do you have any advice for leaders who are trying to prove and demonstrate the business benefits of their AI investments?
Well, think IoT. One of the coolest things about IoT is instrumentation. So when you look at, like, Trenitalia rolled out the first fully instrumented train a few years ago. I was there for the launch, so I got to really take a look at all that. It was amazing. And when you can really
Yeah.
instrument your business, then you can start tracking again the ROI. So how do you manage that stuff? A lot of it has been very loosey goosey over the years.
Hmm.
Has been very creative, let's say, in how companies have come up with their estimates of the money they've saved and these different things. But I think the instrumentation of the enterprise, coupled with process mining, machine learning, observability,
Hmm.
is going to create a whole new world now in which we can really tell how much value we've gotten from this service or from that service. So I think we're getting there. And I think the key is to really think in terms of capturing that data and processing that data and making sure you're aware of how much things cost. What is the total cost of ownership for a call center, for example? How many calls are we able to do? What's the customer satisfaction level
Right.
on these calls? All these kinds of things, when you start to measure them and manage them responsibly, they're going to yield tremendous insights. And, again, in terms of AI, just know what you're trying to do. One of the coolest things I've come across are these folks saying that they're kind of blown away by what some of these models can learn. And when you think about the fact that foundational models like ChatGPT and Gemini is the one I use, they can reflect back prose in perfect format. Maybe the facts aren't always correct. That's where they're having trouble with hallucinations. But the prose is, I mean, the syntax is great. And if you think about the fact that most business challenges are nowhere near as complex as the English language, well, once you
Hmm.
can start again marrying that process mining, that process awareness and monitoring with the activities of your systems, your observability, traditional observability, start managing and monitoring all that stuff, that gets very, very interesting. So I think that we are going to see a real renaissance of actual ROI and actual TCO, and that's going to be very, very good for business and very good for creativity and for innovating. Because a lot of times companies don't innovate because they're afraid to take the chance. And I think
Yeah.
that the hyper acceleration I talked about with co-pilots and things of this nature is really going to push forward that innovation thread, and that's going to open up a lot of new, really interesting doors.
So where do you think we are in that? I guess you can use different metaphors for AI. The end of the honeymoon. If you use the Gartner vernacular, you got the hype cycle followed by the trough of disillusionment. Where are we? I mean, clearly we've been in a exuberant phase with AI. Um, are we going to stay in that exuberance, or these when companies start to focus on ROI and results, are they going to enter a new phase as they think about their AI investments?
That I think we are at the enter a new phase part of the process
Hmm.
here. It's like I think there are going to be sort of mini troughs of illusion and mini peaks, and they're just going to keep kind of overlapping. So it's not we're not going to see another AI winter. I'll put it that way. I think those days are in the
Yeah.
past. But there needs to be a lot of education about which tools to use, which models to use for which use cases, and how do you do that. There's a lot of emphasis on guardrails right now. And guess what? You can use other AI models to monitor the AI models that are doing cool things. That's one of the
Hmm.
guests we had, who
Hmm.
was one of the co-founders of Cloudera, was on the show the other day. And that's what they're doing, is they're doing an open book AI, and then they're penalizing the model for getting things wrong, rewarding it for getting things right. And then they have a separate model entirely that vets what the first model produced. So and I actually know a guy here in Pittsburgh. He's a pretty smart guy. He uses GPT, and he set up a whole boardroom where he's got his accountant as a GPT, his marketer as a GPT, his sales guy as a GPT, his
Wow.
administrator as a GPT, and they hash out ideas. He throws ideas at them, and they all talk to each other. And like he reads the reports of what they said. I mean, that's pretty cutting edge stuff. You know what I mean? So,
That's pretty cool.
yeah, I think that we're just at the beginning, but I will say this, the companies that really embrace this stuff are just going to crush their competitors. Anyone who waits too long to
Yeah.
start playing around is basically signing their own death warrant business wise.
Yeah. Let's end this with a bang. Um, what's last question. What's a bold prediction for next year, 2025, that no one that you don't think anybody sees coming?
All right, you might like this. I came up with this the other night, laughing in bed as I was thinking about things. I think the age of the individual blowhard is finally going to shut down. Is what I think,
That would be
because
great.
because
Okay.
if you think about in both government and business, there is very often this one person who just stands in the way, who causes trouble, who won't allow things
Hmm.
to go through, who won't innovate, who blocks progress in some way, shape, or form. And I think what you're going to see is that AI models are going to get very good at understanding behavioral patterns within organizations, even not even looking at the content itself, but just looking at how often someone emails, how often they're in this
Hmm.
application, they're in that application, who they interact with in the organization. All these things are patterns that can very easily be assessed and crunched by AI models. And I think what's going to happen is we're going to have better and better tools for management and for frontline workers in making suggestions about things and just noticing certain behavioral patterns and saying, maybe you should contact this person, or why don't you do this, or why don't you try this out? These ideas that AI is going to throw out there. And what's going to happen is the individual blowhard is going to be circumvented or just ostracized, because it's going to become obvious who has been standing in the way, and the
Right.
the AI is going to inform other people, maybe you should look at so and so, and like find out why they always seem to be a stick in the mud, and maybe there was a good reason for it. But the thing is, you think about management meetings, so for so long now, these CEOs have to rely on what these other people say in these meetings to know what's really happening. And those days are soon going to be over, because the CEO is going to have what I wrote about this. I called it the executive cockpit, where basically you've
Hmm.
trained your own small language model on all of your enterprise data from your CRM, ERP, support systems, whatever it is you've got, you train it, and then you set up probably Kafka topics from these systems into a vector database that is aligned with this executive cockpit. And then the senior executive just sits there and asks questions all day long. How can we improve marketing in the Southeast? How can we control costs in the
Right.
Southwest? How can we do this? I'll do that, and get tremendous answers. And now that executive doesn't have to rely on the word of all these people around him or her. They're going to be fully versed in what's really happening. And I think that is excellent news for everyone, because hiding
Mm.
the truth is going to be a lot harder in the future.
Yeah, well, that's definitely a bold prediction, Eric. It has been such a fun and fascinating conversation, as it always is. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey, thank
All
you.
right, folks, that's a wrap for this episode of Big Bites with Ocient. Thanks for tuning in, and here's to an exciting 2025. Until next time, keep innovating.